Some of the most meaningful jewelry you own isn't new. It's inherited. A ring from a grandmother, a necklace full of memories, but no longer your style. Duke's Jewelers reimagines family heirlooms into custom pieces you'll actually wear and love. Working one-on-one, Duke's designers honor the original story while creating something fresh and modern. Don't let meaningful jewelry sit unused. Let it live on beautifully. Visit Duke's Jewelers in Springville or online at dukesjewelers.com, where old stories become new treasures.
Derek Overstreet, founder of the New Millennium Group. We're a financial planning firm. We have advisors standing by right now to take your call. 888-999-6370. The reason you're going to want to call is we're going to help you retire 3 to 5 years before you thought possible. The way we do this is by putting together a step-by-step plan. So if you're one of those people listening and you'd like a plan in writing, give us a call at 888-999-6370. That's 888-999-6370, or go to utahsfinancialplanner.com.
Believe it or not, this guy actually has friends.
Nice.
This is Scotty G and Friends on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
97.5, the KSL Sports Zone, kicking off the third hour of the program. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hump day. Your week's almost over. You're on the downslide, at least. One of our favorite dudes on the planet is going to join us here in just a moment. Shehan Jeyarajah from CBS Sports, and a lot to break down with him. Look, Shehan has got you covered when it comes to the Big 12. Everything you need to know, Shehan is your guy. In fact, he joins us right now. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's always good to catch up. Is this busy time, quiet time? What's life like for you right now?
Yeah, a little bit of an in-between, right? Because obviously there's not a lot of news coming out right this second, but you are getting camps. You are trying to figure out who the heck is on whose roster at this point. So I feel like you're mostly doing groundwork as opposed to putting out a lot of new content.
All right, so the NCAA, and you got to check everything today because you're never sure what's going down on April Fool's Day, but it does appear that there's some legislation passed to try to prohibit blind transfers. Is this A, true, or is it a April Fool's Day joke? And B, how much are lawyers looking to sink some billable hours into this one?
But to be clear, Utah State is having a Cal Field, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's going down for sure.
Great. Love to hear it. No, so this is a really interesting piece, right? Because as people know, they got rid of the second transfer window after the season. But last season, you saw numerous players ultimately, kind of headlined by Jake Retzlaff, the former BYU quarterback, just jump out of, unenroll from schools and enroll at new schools, kind of going around the portal completely. That's how they were able to get around sort of the portal windows. Well, the reality is there's no point of having transfer portal windows if you don't have sort of rules around that. And so the NCAA's tried to come out ahead, very strict punishments potentially on the horizon. What they've said is that potentially you'd be looking at 50% suspension for a head coach if they were to try to recruit a player who kind of tries to circumvent the transfer portal. But like you said, I mean, this is going to be something that's ultimately challenged. What will be the timeline of that challenge is kind of hard to say, but I do think that ultimately, the NCAA understands, like, if we don't have clear rules to try to enforce some of these new policies that we're putting into effect, they don't really exist in practice.
Yeah. And look, I applaud the NCAA. It may be a little slow, but this is one where it's like, okay, you know what? We do have these rules in place. We are letting you guys go to whatever school you want, but you got that 15 days to do it. You got your 15 days. I know you guys are sending all kinds of illegal DMs throughout the course of the year, and so those deals are pretty much put in place already before that 15-day window opens up, but at least you kind of have to honor those 2 weeks to make your move. And if things aren't going well for you in fall camp, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to deal with it. I mean, we got to draw a line somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I've said really since the beginning of NIL and transfer portal and all this stuff is that there isn't a sport where you have essentially unfettered permanent free agency, right? Where any player can jump at any time for any amount of money, where you don't have players locked in. And we're slowly starting to work our way towards some of this being the case, right? We saw with the Damon Williams situation at Washington, they were willing to potentially go after him for his buyout and for his contract, and that ultimately convinced him to stay put. Now, that of course didn't end up being the case with Duke quarterback Darian Mensah, who went to Miami anyway. So we're kind of trying to get a little bit closer to stability. Now, I think that sort of the agreement seems to be that it probably isn't going to happen permanently until we get either a law coming from Congress or until we get collective bargaining of some type. But in the moment, right, neither of those things is likely to happen in the next, let's say, 6 months. And so they're trying to find ways to work around that, trying to find ways to figure out what they can enforce, and frankly, kind of trying to feel around to see what are the boundaries that they're setting for themselves.
We're coming up in a midterm on November, so I don't know if anything really gets done, but do you feel like there is starting to be a little bit more of an appetite by Washington to help out in terms of this?
I think there is, right? I think there is. Like you said, there's a lot of serious stuff going on in the world right now, and that makes it a little more complicated than it might have been even 6 months ago. But, we did have this roundtable with President Trump, and roundtables, there's only so much that happens. But I think that more than anything else, this is showing that this has gotten the White House's attention. This has got Congress people's attention. We've had people on both sides of the aisle, frankly, who have been willing to kind of come up with different types of legislation and bring them in front of their colleagues, whether it be Senators Cory Booker and Richard Blumenthal on the left, or of course, Ted Cruz, Tommy Tuberville, and many others on the right. And so I do think that we are in a position where there is going to be more focus put on this issue heading forward. The question ultimately becomes, again, do we reach the point of having 60 senators in favor of a bill? Because the reality is, right, I mean, even if you have a number of senators on both sides who support some levels of legislation, we do see, especially when we start talking about the Democrats, they don't like the idea of, for example, getting rid of some levels of player agency, getting rid of the need for things like collective bargaining. It's more complicated than it seems in practice, but I do think that it has Washington's attention.
Nice. Shehan Jeyarajah, kind enough to join us here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. All right, so there's some institutions that will just lean into being the evil empire, if you will, or the villain. With their recent football and basketball hires, is there anybody more than LSU more equipped to take over that role?
Yeah, I know the cuddliest coach on campus right now might be Kim Mulkey.
I know, right?
No, it's a fascinating collection of people. And by the way, Jay Johnson, the baseball coach over there, is very well respected in the profession. But you talk about people who are willing to go big. I mean, these are people who are willing to go big. I think that institutionally it kind of started in some ways with their old athletic director, Scott Woodward, who is known as a big game fisherman. But I think that that's actually kind of empowered some of the other power brokers around campus to similarly want to go big. And, we've heard a lot that the governor over there really liked Lane Kiffin. He really wanted LSU to land Lane Kiffin. And same deal with, of course, Will Wade coming back as well. He's somebody who was very popular before he was ultimately let go for NCAA violations, some of which are no longer violations at this point. And look, I mean, when you look at Will Wade, he's a coach who's managed to win basically everywhere that he's been. He took North Carolina State back to the NCAA tournament in his first season after a disappointing year last year. And now he's going to head to LSU, where they're going to try to find even more unlimited resource to try to build him a winner. So, no, I mean, when you talk about the big villains right now of college athletics, I mean, I think the LSU has to be right at the top.
Oh, there's no doubt. And a good friend of mine is now kind of the associate AD, and he was the AD at McNeese State that gave Will Wade a chance to get out of Siberia and get back into coaching. And I'm a huge fan of Heath Schroyer, but he's a wheeler and dealer, man. And I texted him the other day. I'm like, how much fun is this to be a part of what's growing? He's like, I absolutely love it, man. So I think what LSU's got brewing right now, it's like, okay. And I don't know if anything signifies where college athletics is right now than what we've seen out of LSU.
No, for sure. And I think that, obviously I've done a lot of writing and reporting about Texas Tech and kind of their understanding that this is a once in a lifetime moment. Well, I think that LSU sort of feels that same way with this opportunity, right? Where there are a lot of programs, frankly, that threw a lot of money and threw a lot of resource in the first couple of years of NIL. I'm thinking of like a Tennessee, for example, who built themselves into a playoff team that way. Well, I think that there are some levels of people, kind of waning in that regard, right? Of donors having put 5-6 years into this and kind of being on the downswing. Well, LSU is on the upswing right now. They are very engaged. Obviously, you have a personality like Lane Kiffin who's able to come in and make a lot of cases to people. The governor, Jeff Landry, like I mentioned, is also a huge part, I think, of some of those conversations as well. And then you add Will Wade, who's a relentless fundraiser. You add Kim Mulkey, who is the type of coach, I covered her when I was at Baylor, right? She is somebody who is able to go in and really impose her will on a donor base in an athletic department. They are full steam ahead right at this moment. And I know that my colleague Chris Heimer has reported that just in this football roster alone, they potentially are looking at more than $40 million for the 2026 season. It's crazy stuff to look at right now.
Wow. And essentially, I think I was reading somewhere where they've got like 200 million in buyouts and, it essentially just dead money almost. I mean, it's just remarkable what's going on down there at LSU. If there's a team out there, a football team that based on coaching hires or retention or transfer portal acquisitions that bettered themselves immensely going into spring and fall camp, who would be some of your candidates there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I'm going to start with one that people in your state might not like to hear, and that's the University of Michigan. I really do like what Kyle Whittingham did over there, obviously bringing over a lot of big-time talent. And I mean, it's funny, right? From a coaching perspective, you're basically getting a Utah All-Star team with Jason Beck coming over as offensive coordinator, and of course, then bringing over that defensive coordinator, Jay Hill from BYU as well. So I think that that's a staff and a program that really has the potential to pop in year one. I think that this roster was already better than I think that people realize because of the way that they've spent the past couple of years. And having a coach like Kyle Whittingham come in, I think that's going to end up being a huge deal. Obviously Texas Tech was a team that popped last season, but I think that they might have actually taken in some ways a step forward this year, especially on the offensive side of the ball. The big question to me, even heading into last season, was their offensive line play. Well, they have a lot coming back, and they managed to once again reload on the defensive side of the ball. I think, and then of course you add, I'd be remiss not to mention Brendan Sorsby, one of the top quarterbacks coming in, and another Big 12 team as well that really made hay in the portal. Obviously, it was a lot of players following their coach, but Eric Morris at Oklahoma State managed to bring in the core of his North Texas team that won 11 games last year. And on top of that, by the way, augmented it with a lot of power conference level offensive and defensive linemen as well. That was sort of the piece where they weren't able to compete with South Florida back last season. Well, that's not going to be the case at Oklahoma State. They really feel like they've built enough. So, look, they won, I believe, 1 game last year. I'm not saying that they're going to win 12 this year, but expect them to be back in the 8-9 win range.
Is Sorsby a game changer, or was he just the beneficiary of being the best quarterback available? Because I don't know if I'm 100% sold on him.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Like, if you think that he's going to come in and be Fernando Mendoza, like, no,
Yeah.
he's not necessarily going to do that. But I think that there's a couple pieces of this, right? One is, and maybe even to make the comp to Mendoza, they feel like they're going to be able to run the ball at a very high level. They've got 4 offensive line starters returning, including both tackles. They've got 3 running backs who they think are NFL caliber players, especially with Quinton Joyner coming back, who they expected to be their running back 1 last year before he got hurt. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it, too, is that one, he's able to add, I think, a running element to this offense that I think that especially after Baron Morton got hurt, they missed. But second of all, they really do feel like he is a processor at a higher level than what they've had in recent years. That he's going to be able to go down the field, that he's going to be able to make quick decisions. And while Baron Morton had a lot of skills, that was something that he struggled with, especially when you look at some of those games where, the offense was a little inconsistent. The 2 BYU games, for example. Of course, that Oregon game where they really kind of felt like he lost his head just a little bit. So it's not necessarily that they feel like he's going to come in and win the Heisman next year, but they feel like he's just going to be able to be more of a mover and shaker for them offensively and allow their offense to not necessarily reach the level of their top 3 defense, but at least be more in that top 10 to 15 range.
Mom, can you tell me a story?
Sure. Once upon a time, a mom needed a new car.
Was she brave?
She was tired, mostly. But she went to Carvana.com and found a great car at a great price. No secret treasure map required.
Did you have to fight a dragon?
Nope, she bought it 100% online. From her bed, actually.
Was it scary?
Honey, it was as unscary as car buying could be.
Did the car have a sunroof?
It did, actually.
Okay, good story.
Car buying you'll want to tell stories about. Buy your car today on
Carvana.
Delivery fees may apply.
So much pressure on Morgan Scalley this year as the head coach of the University of Utah. And we'll talk about that. That's obvious. I think the next highest pressure packed position here in the state of Utah, Morgan's one. I think Kelly Papinga taking over for Jay Hill as the defensive coordinator at BYU is right up there, because what BYU's been able to do defensively, making that transition into the Big 12 over the last 2 years, has just been remarkable. That's something that we're certainly keeping an eye on here for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great call, because, you look at when things change for BYU, it's when they did bring in Jay Hill, right? He was seen, if Kalani Sitake were to leave, right, he was seen by many as a coach who could be elevated to be head coach at BYU because of the success that he's had on defense. And, Kalani Sitake said after Coach Hill left, right, this is our BYU defense. We feel like we have a lot of guys here who understand what we want to do. And I do think there is truth to that. But Jay Hill is a very special play caller. He was somebody who was always able to put his players in the right spot. They've developed and identified at a really high level. And, again, we'll kind of see what of that defensive special sauce was Jay Hill, what of it was BYU and Kalani Sitake. So I think that they've got great administration there. I think that they've got a great system there, but it's going to be a lot to ask for a coach, obviously stepping in as a first-time defensive play caller, who, by the way, is leading a team that expects to not only compete for the Big 12, but potentially win the Big 12 as well.
How difficult of a situation is Morgan Scalley? And not because Utah's got a lot of rebuilding to do, but just you never want to be the guy that takes over for the guy. And the bullseye that's on him and this staff after losing some key members of that staff and that roster to Michigan. I mean, this is, and I love Morgan. I've known him for 20 years. He actually used to do sports radio for us right out of college. And they decided for some reason he wanted to go into coaching, which I don't know. I don't know if that was really the best move. Him. Yeah, I think he did okay. But it's just, those are tough shoes to fill for him.
Yeah, I think that it's just really unfortunate, frankly, for Morgan, right? Because it seemed like he was set up in such a perfect way heading into his first season as a head coach. Obviously, great staff around him, lots of great players around him. He was able to take over a roster that seemed to be trending upwards. And while I still have a lot of faith in him, I think that he's going to be a really good coach at Utah. It's just the immediacy of it becomes a lot more difficult. And this was already going to be a different roster after losing essentially the entire offensive line that I think was really the catalyst behind powering this team. But I actually think more than anything else, losing Jason Beck is a really big deal for them because, when they brought in Devin Dampier last year, he came with Jason Beck. He was somebody who knew how to run that system at a very high level. Well, now, of course, they're bringing in a more of a passing offense, and they got two quarterbacks in Devin Dampier and Bird Ficklin who are more runners at this point. Now, I think they're going to find a way to have a happy medium as well, but I mean that's a big deal, right? When defensive coaches come in with established systems on offense, it really helps them out a lot. When you have to start from scratch, and I mean, again, we'll obviously see what happens with this first offensive staff, but if they struggle out of the gates, all of a sudden you're out there trying to figure out what's the next iteration of this going to be. So I think his job is just a lot harder from that perspective. Now, again, I think that one thing that is helpful is this isn't the hardest schedule that they're ever going to have, right? This is a pretty moderate schedule other than that game against BYU. But I mean, again, they kind of hope that they could be a Big 12 contender in year one. And maybe that's still on the table, but it's going to be a lot to ask of them, I think.
When you nationally are looking at a situation like the Pac-12, do you and your colleagues look at that as just like, that's just Mountain West 2.0? Like when you see those schools and you see how that's set up, does that seem elevated in your eyes at all as opposed to what originally was there in the Mountain West?
So it's interesting, right? I think that we have gone through so much with this idea of Power 4, Group of 5, right? And I think that we're going to have to adjust a little bit. And what I mean by that is there's a Big Two, right? There's the Big Ten and the SEC. Then there's a little bit of a gradient, and the Big 12 and the ACC are certainly above everybody else. But I think that, the idea of sort of all the group of fives being the same or even similar is probably not the case anymore. And I think that where this new Pac-12 kind of thrives is that I think they're going to be pretty competitive with the American. They're going to have a chance to be, 1A, 1B as the best non-power conference in college football. And I think that's not a small deal, right? If you can have a pathway to earning that bid to the college football playoff, maybe every other year, that's a really good place to be, I think, if you are the Mountain West, because, you add a number of teams that were already winning at a high level, led, of course, by Boise State, with a Washington State and Oregon State duo that I think is still very high quality, that I think probably is stuck sort of resource-wise somewhere in between the power conferences and the group of five conferences. Like, I think that does elevate what they've been. And certainly if you are one of those teams that's joining the new Pac-12, you're probably a little happy to be rid of, not to be disrespectful, right? But some of the weight, right?
Yeah,
some of the teams that you were sharing with that maybe you don't feel like we're trying to compete at the same level as you. So I certainly view it as a step up for most of these teams. I think that, again, in this world where you're working in more of a gradient than pure top and bottom, I think that it's a good place to be. And yeah, I mean, I think that there is a notable gap between the Pac-12 and the ACC and Big 12, but I think that there's less of one than when they were in the Mountain West.
So I want to, I want to be careful because I don't want to get in trouble with your CBS bosses here, but I do like the NCAA tournament, and I've seen the numbers being pushed by the NCAA and CBS that these are all-time high ratings for the NCAA tournament. And I know football is your bread and butter, but do you feel like there is an appetite to where basketball can be at least somewhat, and I'm talking not the tournament, I'm talking about regular season, college hoops can be somewhat of a draw because the Big 12 seems like they're going heavy in on basketball. This new Pac-12 conference, let's be honest, it's a good football conference, but it's a great basketball conference. So when you look at that, do you feel like that appetite is growing a little bit where TV networks can say, okay, you know what, we can showcase this and we can make money on this?
Yeah, I think that what I'd say, right, is that football's going to be the driver. I mean, I think that that's understood, right? But I think that there's more marginal value to be drawn than has been drawn in years past. And you mentioned, of course, the basketball side of things. I'd also point to the women's basketball side of things. Talking to people, like you mentioned, at the Big 12, they feel like women's basketball has been one of the most undervalued assets that college athletics has. There's great appetite even when you start getting into the volleyball, when you start getting into the softball, and I do think that men's basketball, again, it's really big right now. I mean, you look at the peak of that UConn Duke game, right? I mean, we're pushing 20 million people. That's a big deal for an individual game on that top end. So I do think that it does matter. I do think that it is a driver. Of course, it's going to be secondary to football, but especially, like, again, I go back to what we talked about with like the American versus the Pac-12. They're going to be two conferences that are competitive with each other. Well, the Pac-12 being a great basketball league, that is something that can provide value, that can potentially help with some of these negotiations, that can help drive brand value. And, I always have this conversation, right? When we talk about money going to different conferences, that's a part of it, but the other part of it is relevance. You want to be considered a major conference from a monetary perspective because you're treated differently by fans, because you're treated differently by investors, by sponsors. And I think that that's one place where this new Pac-12 has the opportunity to jump up is, yes, you come in, by the way, with the Pac-12 branding, which means something to people, but also I think that if you're able to establish a level of relevance in basketball where potentially you're competing to be a multi-bid league year in and year out, that's, I think, where you're really able to make some hay.
So now we're living in this digital world where, again, you can check out the show at KSLSports.com on our YouTube page as well. And so there's always a lot of judgment going on to the background of guests and this started during, COVID when everybody was on Zoom. I think, you mentioned the Battle Cattle field for Utah State. I could probably arrange for you to get a Battle Cattle helmet with that Holstein look and put that in that top shelf right next to that globe there. I think that would be a good look right there.
I would absolutely take it. You know me. Actually, it was the University of Idaho sent me a little replica of the Kibbe Dome. I've got it back there. So listen, if you can get it to me, I'll put it up.
All right, done and done. I'm on it. Hey, Shehan, you're the best, man. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
He is Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports, right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
I sold my car in Carvana last night.
Well, that's cool.
No, you don't understand. It went perfectly. Real offer, down to the penny. They're picking it up tomorrow. Nothing went wrong.
So, what's the problem?
That is the problem. Nothing in my life goes as smoothly. I'm waiting for the catch.
Maybe there's no catch.
That's exactly what a catch would want me to think.
Wow, you need to relax.
I need to knock on wood. Do we have wood? Is this table wood?
I think it's laminate.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's close enough.
Car selling without a catch. Sell your car today on
Carvana.
Pickup fees may apply.